Think about the last time you watched someone confidently explain something they clearly didn't understand. A colleague presenting a plan full of holes they couldn't see, a stranger online arguing a position with absolute certainty, missing the fundamental point of the whole debate. Someone at a dinner table holding court on a topic they'd read one article about, unaware that the people quietly listening knew far more than they did. You noticed the gap. You could see the incompetence. The person displaying it could not. And the reason they couldn't see it is the same reason you might be doing exactly the same thing right now, in some area of your life, without the slightest awareness that it's happening. This is the core of what psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger discovered in 1999 in a series of experiments that produced one of the most cited and most misunderstood findings in modern psychology. Their work began with a question that sounds almost too simple to be interesting. Why do incompetent people not know they are incompetent? The answer, it turned out, was not laziness or arrogance. It was something more fundamental and far more uncomfortable. The skills required to perform a task well are often the same skills required to recognize whether a task is being performed well. If you lack the first, you automatically lack the second. You don't just do it badly. You don't know you're doing it badly. The very competence you're missing is the competence that would allow you to notice its absence. Dunning and Kruger tested this across multiple domains: logical reasoning, grammar, and humor. In each case, participants in the lowest quartile of performance dramatically overestimated their scores. People who performed in the bottom quarter on a logical reasoning test believed they had scored in the top half. They weren't just wrong about how well they'd done, they were wrong in a particular direction, with a particular confidence, and they had no way of seeing it from where they stood. Meanwhile, participants who performed in the top quartile showed the opposite error. They tended to slightly underestimate their relative performance, assuming that tasks they found easy must be similarly easy for others. Competence came with a kind of epistemic humility. Incompetence came with its mirror image. The study was titled somewhat dramatically, "Unskilled and Unaware of It," and it won Dunning and Kruger the Ig Nobel Prize, the award given to research that first makes you laugh, then makes you think. But the laughter tends to be aimed outward, at others, at the obviously overconfident people in your life. The thinking, if you follow it honestly, turns inward. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect is not a description of stupid people. It is a description of a universal feature of human cognition. Every person is incompetent in most things. Every person operates in domains where their knowledge is shallow and their confidence may not reflect their actual ability. The question is never whether you have blind spots. The question is where they are. There is a useful shape to how confidence and competence tend to relate across the arc of learning something new. When you first encounter a new domain, you know very little, but you don't yet know what you don't know. This produces what researchers sometimes call the peak of Mount Stupid, a point of early shallow knowledge where confidence is high and competence is low, and the gap between them is widest. As you learn more, you begin to encounter the complexity, the exceptions, the cases where your early understanding breaks down. This is the valley of despair, where confidence drops sharply as competence climbs. True experts who have moved through the valley and accumulated deep knowledge tend to have calibrated confidence. Their sense of what they know tracks more closely with what they actually know, including a clear awareness of the limits of their knowledge. The shape of this curve explains something you may have noticed about conversations with genuine experts. They are often the people most likely to say, "I'm not sure, it depends," or "That's a more complex question than it appears." Not because they know less, but because they know enough to see the complexity that the novice can't yet perceive. The most dangerous position on the curve is not ignorance. Ignorance at least knows it doesn't know. The most dangerous position is the early peak. Enough knowledge to feel confident,
Dunning-Kruger's
not
original
enough to
finding
feel
has been
uncertain.
complicated by subsequent research in ways that matter for how you understand it. A 2016 paper by computational psychologist Randall Burris and his colleagues pointed out that some of what looks like the Dunning-Kruger effect in the original data might be partly explained by a statistical artifact called regression to the mean, the tendency of extreme scores in one measurement to be less extreme in related measurements. This doesn't eliminate the core finding, but it suggests the effect may be somewhat smaller or more nuanced than the popular version implies. More recent cross-cultural work has found that the pattern varies across different populations and domains. The effect is real. The caricature version of it may be overdrawn. What remains most durable and most useful from Dunning's own subsequent work is not the curve, but the mechanism. In 2011, Dunning wrote that the central problem isn't that incompetent people are ignorant. It's that they are ignorant of their ignorance. He coined the phrase double burden of incompetence. You carry the inability to perform, and you carry the inability to recognize the inability. Both are made of the same missing material. And this is why feedback and exposure are so important. Not because they tell you what you're doing wrong, but because they give you access to a frame of reference you otherwise cannot generate from inside your own head. This is also why the effect tends to be domain-specific. A surgeon who has spent decades developing expertise in the operating room is not immune to the Dunning-Kruger effect in domains outside medicine. A professor who has mastered a narrow field may be wildly overconfident about adjacent fields that seem related but require different tools. Expertise in one area does not protect you from novice-level miscalibration in another. And the most educated, most accomplished people tend to have the largest number of domains in which they have just enough knowledge to be dangerous. Enough to form opinions, not enough to know the limits of those opinions. The practical implication of all this is not to distrust yourself or to second-guess every belief. It is to cultivate what psychologists call metacognition, thinking about your thinking. To ask in any domain where you hold a confident opinion, what would it feel like to be wrong about this? What would I be unable to see from where I'm standing? Who knows more about this than I do, and what do they think? These questions are uncomfortable precisely because confidence is comfortable. Certainty feels like knowledge. But the feeling of knowing is not the same as the fact of knowing, and one of the oldest and most reliable findings in cognitive psychology is that human beings are systematically overconfident about the accuracy of their beliefs. David Dunning himself, in interviews reflecting on 2 decades of work on this topic, has said something that stays with you. He has pointed out that the research was not really about other people, it was about all of us. He said that the study that changed his thinking was not one that demonstrated incompetence in others, but one that revealed the limits of his own self-assessment. The person who knows most about the Dunning-Kruger effect is not immune to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which means if you have been nodding along to this video, thinking, yes, I know people exactly like this, while feeling comfortable that you yourself are the self-aware exception, that feeling is exactly what the research would predict. Not because you're definitely wrong about yourself, but because the experience of being the exception feels the same whether you are one or not. The only difference is information you currently don't have. So the question isn't whether the Dunning-Kruger effect applies to you. It does. The question is in which rooms of your confidence you've never thought to look.